Hello and welcome to Spirit and Life Radio. I'm your host, Jeffrey Meyer. Welcome to the broadcast today. Today is Election Day, and I want to encourage you to get out there and vote, as well as to visit two websites. The first one's called ChristianVoterGuide.com. That's ChristianVoterGuide.com. Every state is listed there to help you vote with a Christian perspective on the issues of today and to reveal where our candidates stand. If we want to have a Christian influence on our nation, we want to vote right by aligning ourselves with true biblical values and principles. The second website is for pastors and leaders, clergy. I want you to go to Christian-JewishVoterGuides.org. That's Christian-JewishVoterGuides.org. Now, I want to play a recording of former Governor Mike Huckabee. He is a born-again Christian, a former pastor and governor, and hosts the Mike Huckabee Show on Fox News Channel. Now, the speech I want to share with you was given back on June 19th on Capitol Hill, pertaining to pro-life, pro-marriage, pro-conscience, and pro-Israel. The speech is approximately 15 minutes long, and I'm going to condense it for you because I think it's one of the most succinct, remarkable speeches in what's going on today with our government. It's very well written with some fantastic points that I think as Christians we all ought to consider when we go to the voter box. Let's take a listen.
Thanks to all of you for being here and for your patience enduring the heat. I want to begin today by maybe saying something of a little bit of a surprise. There's something with which I actually agree with President Obama. And I know that may surprise you, but I agree with him in what he said in August of 2008 regarding marriage. Here's what he said. He said, "As for me, a Christian, marriage is a sacred union. God is in the mix." Mr. President, I agree with what you said then. It's what you say now that I have to take issue with. You see, the President said that the basis of his belief in marriage between a man and a woman was his Christian faith and the fact that God was in the mix. Which leads me to say that if he's changed his mind, one of three things have happened. Either he was not telling us the truth then, he is not telling us the truth now, or perhaps God rewrote the book and only gave a version of it to the president and not to the rest of us. I'll leave it to you to decide what happened. There are two documents that I believe give us reason to take the stand that we do. Not that we are against anybody. We are for the marriage of a man and a woman, and the two documents from which we derive that are the Constitution and the Word of God, the Bible. And unapologetically, I stand before you today and say that we either have a civilization that is God-centered or that is me-centered. If it is God-centered, we ultimately believe that in order to live the life that we live, we have to do it within the context and the moral absolutes by which have been established by the supreme holy God of the universe. It is not a theocratic government, but it is a government that our forefathers so understood that in defining for us their declaration of independence from a country of tyranny to become a nation of freedom, they said that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all of us are created equal and are endowed by our Creator with these absolute rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Government does not give us our rights. Government only has the responsibility to preserve and protect the rights that God gave us. That's the order. The Constitution makes it very clear that the ultimate authority in our system of government is not a Supreme Court, nor is it a president, nor is it 535 legislators. The ultimate authority, the people, bound together by the document of the Constitution which preserves it. In over 32 states where the people have decided this issue, they have decided to affirm traditional marriage. Now, a few legislatures have taken a different course, but when you hear that the trend is moving, keep in mind, it is not a trend of the people, it is a trend of the courts. When people in black robes believe that they are superior to the vote of the people, we are living with the greatest heresy of our time, and I'm talking judicial supremacy. There is nothing in the Constitution of the United States that gives the judicial branch the right to consider themselves above the people, above the Constitution, above the executive, and above the legislative branches. Today, we want to remind 9 people wearing black robes who were never elected to anything, who were appointed to their positions, not elected to them. We need to remind them that they are only the Supreme Court, not the supreme branch of government. And further, they are most certainly not the supreme being from which all law ultimately emanates. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us to say that there is no responsibility for the executive and judicial and the legislative branches to capitulate their powers that are equal to a judicial branch that has decided that it somehow has taken upon itself the role, the right, and the responsibilities of all 3 branches, because it doesn't have that authority. From 9th grade civics, we should have learned that there are 3 branches of government and all of them are equal. I sometimes wonder, do some of the people who go to law school from the nice schools, did they ever learn that? Most of us learned it. What we have going on in America is the equivalent of a judicial coup d'etat, where judges believe that they can not only interpret law, but they can make it, and they can implement it. No, my friend. If the courts decide that something is unconstitutional, all they can do is render that as their version, their branch, their understanding. But in order to change the law to enable a different view, that has to go back to the legislature. And in order for it to be carried out, that has to go to the executive branch. It's time that we have people in the executive branch who recognize they have no responsibility, they have no right just to carry out something because 9 people in robes said they had to. Over the past 41 years, we have slaughtered 55 million babies because nobody had the courage to stand up and say, the courts don't have a right to order the slaughter of unborn children. It's time we start saying, courts, you cannot prescribe such an order, not unless the legislature and the executive branch were to somehow come to the same immoral and ungodly conclusion that maybe you did. And the legislative branch has been usurped completely by such a notion. The President and the Congress are not required to defy natural law. They are not required to redefine marriage. They are required to follow the will of the people, the Constitution, and the law that has given us the greatest nation on earth, a nation that we will lose if we turn our backs on our origins. There is no doubt in my mind that this country would not exist had it not been for the providential hand of God. And I'm also convinced that if we reject His hand of blessing, we will feel His hand of judgment. In my home state of Arkansas, a single circuit court judge representing one county defied the will of 70% of the voters who had enacted a constitutional amendment to affirm marriage as between one woman, one man, one judge, a local judge. He did it on a late Friday afternoon, so it was too late for someone to file an appeal. Not only did he render the decision, but he virtually said, go out and get married. And a number of people went and did that over the weekend because county clerks capitulated to a judge. I tell you, there is no basis in the law for one person to make such a decision that would not only change the law, but that would prescribe the fix for the change and to actually order it to be carried out, bypassing the other branches. I say it again, judicial supremacy is a curse upon this great republic, and every freedom-loving citizen needs to understand that nothing threatens your personal liberty more than the notion that you would bow your knee to the court system apart from the ultimate rule of the Constitution and all of the branches of government, all of which are not there to tell you what you cannot do, but to guarantee the freedoms that you are always empowered to have. The Bill of Rights does not say what you can't do. The Bill of Rights says what the government can't do. And it's time for us as an American people to say to our own government, enough of you restricting us. Enough of you redefining our institutions. We are not under an obligation to defy God in order to obey you. We are under an obligation to obey God and the law, and if necessary, to defy an institution that is out of control. The National Organization for Marriage has been under assault by a criminal enterprise known as the IRS. yet another institution of government that believes that it has the right to trample over the freedoms of citizens with whom they disagree. No greater threat comes to your liberty than when government decides that its purpose is to take away the rights of people and their convictions rather than to preserve and protect the rights of the people and their convictions. Let me share this with you from someone far wiser than me. These words. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. Thus it is that I can urge men to obey the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court, for it's morally right. And I can urge them to disobey segregation ordinances, for they are morally wrong. A law is unjust if it's inflicted upon the minority that as a result of being denied the right to vote had no part in enacting or devising the law. I hope you're able to see the distinction. In no sense do I advocate evading or defying the law, as would the rabid segregationists. That would lead to anarchy. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty or imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. Of course, there's nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evidenced sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pain of the chopping block rather than to submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and the Hungarian freedom fighters, what they did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I'm sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles clear and dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying that country's anti-religious laws. I wish I had penned those words, but they were penned by someone who understood freedom and understood that there is a time to stand up against law when it has become unjust. Those were the words penned by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1954 in his letter from the Birmingham jail. I wish he were here today to say to the people in the building behind this one, Mr. Supreme Court Justices, Madam Supreme Court Justices, your role is only to interpret the law, to make sure that it somehow meshes with the Constitution, not that it messes with the Constitution. Your job is not to create it, but to simply interpret it. And if it is going to be created, it happens in this building behind me, called the Capitol, with the people's elected representative, and it's signed at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue by the executive branch. And I would hope that we'd have people in this building and the one down Pennsylvania Avenue who would stand up with the courage of their convictions and with the conscience of the Constitution and say, if necessary, we will be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but we will not bow our knees to Nebuchadnezzar, not now, not in the future, not ever, not ever, not ever. Thank you and God bless you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that and that this speech has given you a better understanding of the backwardness that's taking place on so many levels in our country. I'm out of time. Get out there and vote today. Let your voice be heard. Vote right and go to ChristianVoterGuide.com. That's ChristianVoterGuide.com or Christian-JewishVoterGuides.org. That's Christian-JewishVoterGuides.org and watch the video live.